Incredible moment revealed, single dad janitor's warning to CEO sparks surprising transformation. Brian wiped sweat from his brow as he squinted at the pale blue glow of the overhead lights. The echoing sounds of high heels on polished floors reminded him that he belonged somewhere quiet, away from the bustling corporate chatter. Each night, while he scrubbed the glass-walled offices of a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago, he caught glimpses of lives dramatically different from his own. As the janitor, his fingerprints were invisible, held against a backdrop of powerful suits and cooler-than-cool conversations. Just above him, Tom, the esteemed CEO, floated amongst the clouds of ambition, often blind to the workers who kept the company's wheels turning. Brian's heart raced with anxiety, each thump painfully highlighting the burden he carried alone as a single father to 10-year-old Ethan. The thought gnawed at him: losing this job meant losing everything. Ethan deserved the world, a good school, friends, opportunities. As he emptied yet another trash can, dread coated his insides like sludge. What if tomorrow brought whispers of layoffs? What if he was next in line? He hardly remembered the last time he felt secure, and even now, the flicker of hope was dulled by the constant anxiety gnawing at his mind. The sounds of the meeting room echoed louder from the adjacent room as he pushed the mop against the cold tiles. He could picture the lavish dinner spread, the fine wine, someone's booming laughter rising above the mundane. He tightened his grip on the mop, almost finding comfort in the act of cleaning, a physical representation of his desire to keep things orderly in a chaotic world. But then, the projector in the meeting room sputtered, flickered, and went dark. Panic set in as voices raised, anxiously questioning what had happened. Before he could think rationally, Brian made an impulsive decision. He slipped into the meeting room, mop forgotten at his feet. Tom stood there, exuding authority with a waning confidence, his frustration palpable. The projector's gone out, and he said, voice trailing off as he dismissed the chaos. Brian felt his pulse quicken. He hesitated, then stepped forward, every ounce of conviction boiling inside of him. Excuse me, sir. Brian's voice cut through the tension, bold and raw. This company's lifeblood isn't just about profit margins, it's the people who work for you, the ones who keep things running. The room fell silent, eyes widening in surprise. Tom frowned, a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. I don't need to hear from the janitor about running a business, he retorted, brushing Brian aside like an irritating fly. The air crackled with tension, an electric moment clawing at Brian's insides. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The meeting spiraled from catastrophe to PR disaster, and in its wake, Brian's words echoed in his head. Doubt clawed at him. Had he crossed a line? Was the small flame of dignity in him worth jeopardizing what little he had? The tension in the office hung heavy like a polluted sky as Brian swept away the remains of the night, his mind a whirlwind that he couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. Would Tom see the faces behind the suits and understand their struggles? Or would he remain ensconced in his privileged world, light years away from the reality that people like Brian faced daily? The questions lodged in his mind became an incessant ache. As the night wore on, Brian felt ensnared by the chaos he'd entangled himself in. With pride or anger, he had dared to speak up. Off. In the distance, he could hear Tom's heated discussions, each raised voice serving as a reminder that the divide between them was impenetrable. But as Brian adjusted his grip on the mop, he wondered, could a single moment of honesty be the beginning of something more? The anticipation brewed, and the thought of change hung tantalizingly close, the kind of transformation that was born from conflict. Brian felt lost in a storm of thoughts as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The mop handle was slick with moisture, but his grip was steady. He had dared to speak out, and now he was wrestling with the consequences. What if his moment of courage had shattered something he could never repair? The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a reminder of the razor-thin line between bravery and recklessness that he continued with his chores, but each sweep of the mop felt heavier than before. The sleek, polished floors of the office mirrored the veiled lives above his station. He recognized they were well-trodden paths of power, but for him, each step was a climb marked by doubt and insecurity. Brian's thoughts drifted back to Ethan, his son, whose innocence was a balm to his troubles. Could he tell Ethan that his dad had stood up for what was right? Or would this recklessness cost them their stability? His internal debate was interrupted as he heard the meeting room door swing open. Tom emerged, his expression tense, framed by the glow of the overhead lights. The CEO spotted Brian, paused, and their eyes locked for a moment that felt like an eternity. Brian felt exposed under the weight of Tom's scrutiny had he crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "Do you really think anyone cares what you have to say?" Tom's voice lashed out, sharp and dismissive. It encapsulated the chasm between their worlds. Yet, with each word, a strange determination coalesced within Brian. "What if I care?" he replied, surprising even himself with the thickness of his tone. "What if I decide to care enough for all of us, to make you hear?" A flicker of something unrecognizable shifted in Tom's expression. Perhaps surprise, or an unsettling recognition. Brian steadied himself as the unyielding surge of frustration gave way to clarity. He made a decision in that instant he would not sink back into his world of silence. The next day, he arrived at work, steeling himself for the fallout of his boldness. He wasn't just the janitor anymore, that single moment had unearthed a voice within him. During his shift, he overheard snippets of discussions about culture, inclusivity, and the need for a more engaged workforce. Brian's pulse picked up. These conversations weren't just vacant corporate buzzwords, they represented a shift, a possibility. That night, determined to contribute something meaningful, Brian scribbled his thoughts on a notepad. His midnight musings traversed the landscape of workplace dynamics. He wrote of transparency, of valuing employee voices, and of fostering respect not merely for titles but for personal stories. As he typed furiously on his phone, an idea started to form. What if he could channel this energy into something bigger, a movement to bridge the silent chasm that divided them? The next morning, he gathered his courage and approached Mia, the office manager. She was efficient, but sharp, a no-nonsense kind of woman. "I need to talk to you," he said, heart racing. "About the meeting yesterday, and were you the one who interrupted?" she cut in, brow furrowed. "Yes," he replied, breath steadying as he met her gaze. "But I also have some ideas that might actually help address the culture around here. Can we brainstorm together?" For a moment, silence hung heavy. He could sense the hesitation, the internal weighing of the situation. Then Mia nodded, curiosity piqued. As he spoke, his confidence grew. The notion of being part of something bigger swelled inside him, a burgeoning energy that his life had lacked for far too long. If they chose to listen, he could be more than a transient presence within these walls, he could be a catalyst for change. Later that day, he caught sight of Tom again in the hallway, this time with an unguarded expression. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a silent acknowledgement. Brian took a step forward, feeling a gravity pull him closer. "Can we talk?" he asked, resolute. The moment teetered on the edge, a chance to confront or retreat. Tom hesitated, then nodded slowly. The opportunity to face the gulf that had defined their relationship loomed with palpable tension. Could Brian stand strong where many had faltered? They reached the conference room, doors closing behind them. The time had come to face the uncharted territory of their conversation. Whatever lay ahead, Brian knew one thing: this was only the beginning. Brian stepped into the conference room, the door sliding shut behind him with a muted click that echoed in the tension-filled air. The walls, adorned with corporate art depicting soaring cityscapes, felt like they were closing in, trapping him in a moment that could either elevate him or obliterate his recent progress. He caught Tom's eye, assessing his demeanor in the sterile light. "Have a seat," Tom instructed, indicating the opposite chair. Hesitant but resolute, Brian sat down, straightening his posture as if to physically bolster his resolve. This was no longer just about cleaning floors or mopping spills, there were ideas swirling in his mind that needed to be addressed. "What are you really trying to achieve here, Brian?" Tom asked bluntly, his tone a mix of skepticism and curiosity. The words clawed at Brian's throat, each syllable demanding precision. "I want to foster a culture where people feel safe to speak up. I believe your employees want to contribute, and if there's a system in place that encourages them, it will benefit the whole company." He felt the weight of Tom's gaze, scrutinizing his every move. This moment was pivotal. One misstep could send him spiraling back into silence. Yet, paradoxically, the audacity of speaking his truth invigorated him. "Your bold stance yesterday. What makes you think anyone cares about the opinion of the janitor?" Tom's words were icy, stinging with condescension. Yet, within the wound, Brian found the courage to respond. "What makes you think we're not all in this together? You might see me as just a janitor, but my perspective gives me a different view of this company, one you might not see from your corner office." Tom's expression wavered, the initial arrogance faltering for a heartbeat. Brian leaned into that moment, pushing through the noise of his mind. "Every day, I witness the frustration, the potential that's being ignored. I know how this place feels when there's a lack of unity. If we could harness that energy and create channels for open communication, imagine what could happen." Silence enveloped them, filled with a palpable tension as Brian's words hung in the air. Did Tom see him as an equal now? "I tried to ignore the disenchantment in the office, but perhaps it's something we need to address," Tom admitted, his voice strained but tinged with an unexpected flicker of openness. "Why do you care?" Brian swallowed hard. "Because I have a son. I want to show him that standing up for what's right is worth it, and I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't practice what I preach." The vulnerability slipped through, unwelcome yet liberating. Tom raised his brows, perhaps surprised by the personal connection that had surfaced. "You're a single father?" "I didn't know that." "Much about me is hidden beneath the surface," Brian replied, rallying his thoughts. "But I understand the value of community. I want to build a company where people feel they belong, not just because of what they do, but for who they are." Tom shifted in his seat, a tentative nod suggesting he was processing this unfamiliar narrative. The meeting room, once a prison of doubt, seemed to transform, a space where possibilities unfurled. "I need changes implemented," Tom said slowly, as if he were reconsidering the very foundations of his leadership style. "Can you help me with that?" Brian felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with disbelief. Could he really be on the cusp of something monumental? "Yes, I can help, but it has to be a collaborative effort. You'll need to show your team you're open to change." As they laid the groundwork for what could become a transformative workplace initiative, a sense of purpose ignited within Brian. Each word exchanged represented a step away from silence and a move towards empowerment, both his and those around him. "Let us start small," Tom proposed, brightening, "and work our way up." Brian nodded, feeling the weight of possibility settle in his chest. Their discussion might mark the beginning of more than just a project, it could herald a culture shift within the entire organization, but beneath the excitement lingered an unsettling awareness. Was he merely a footnote in this evolving narrative, or could he seize the reins of the story he had begun? As the conversation deepened, Brian wondered what challenges awaited. In the ebb and flow of newfound authority, would he rise above the doubt still creeping at the edges of his mind? And as the hours stretched on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. Would the lines he was now willing to cross prove to be too confining, or could they stretch to allow for his full evolution? The following days were a whirlwind of change for Brian. The initial conversation with Tom had sparked a fire he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the words exchanged in the sterile conference room, it was the realization that he had not only a voice but also a purpose. With each passing moment, he delved deeper into the project, eager to help create a new culture within the company. Brian's mornings morphed into something more than routine. Instead of arriving at work, mind focused on cleaning schedules and supplies, he began to arrive early, armed with not just a mop but a notebook filled with ideas and scribbles. He observed the flow of employees, witnessing their dynamics. The coffee area became his new classroom, where whispered frustrations and dreams took shape among colleagues sharing their regrets and ambitions. Each encounter transformed him. Instead of shying away from conversations, he engaged, listening to the employees' stories. They didn't just need a voice, they needed a champion, a facilitator who could crystallize their scattered thoughts into actionable insight. His ideas solidified, evolving from vague notions to concrete proposals that he meticulously detailed, yet, as progress brewed, a new layer of doubt crept in. Brian often found himself questioning his competence. Could a janitor truly influence an entire workforce, sway leadership habits? The moments when doubt gnawed at him were often accompanied by the image of his son's bright face. He pushed through the mental fog, reminding himself that he wasn't just doing this for the employees, he was building a legacy for his child. Have you started gathering feedback from others? Tom's voice broke into his thoughts one afternoon. They were seated at a makeshift desk in the corner of the office. Their meeting room no longer felt appropriate. Tom flicked through Brian's notes, eyebrows raised with a mixture of intrigue and apprehension. I'm compiling suggestions and grievances from the team, Brian replied, feeling the tension coil within him. He couldn't shake the thought that each response might reinforce or dismantle his growing fears. I think if we can identify pain points, we can address them directly. Tom leaned back, the assessing stare that once pinched Brian now seeming to harbor respect. I admire your initiative, but you understand that some feedback could be difficult to digest. The question stung. Brian knew the risk involved. Pushing the limits of corporate comfort would invoke resistance. He hesitated a moment, allowing the weight of his resolve to settle before he spoke. It's vital we address those issues head-on. If we ignore them, we're betraying the trust of our employees. They need to know their voices matter. Tom nodded slowly, even while uncertainty laced his expression. All right, let us hold a feedback session next week. You can lead it. Set the stage, he suggested, the words falling out with a mix of apprehension and trust. As excitement surged within Brian, he couldn't help but feel the tight grip of responsibility. The responsibility weighed more than any mop he had wielded. This was no longer about cleaning floors. He stood on the edge of a precipice, ready to push others to stand up, much like he had done. However, would he stumble? Would his financial insecurities and past experiences overshadow his ambitions? Everyone was counting on him, but the pulse of anxiety was relentless. He could already envision the gathering, the fierce discussions, the uncomfortable silences, the potential confrontation with those resistant to change. He was no longer a background character, he was stepping into a spotlight that felt daunting yet intoxicating. As he prepared, the stakes climbed higher. The beginning of this new initiative could either unravel everything or weave the fabric of a more unified workplace. Brian grasped the edge of his desk, breathing deeply to master his swirling thoughts. The gears were in motion, but as the moment approached, he couldn't silence the insistent question clawing at his mind: could he become the catalyst for real change, or was he destined to be just another voice lost in the fray? And then came the unsettling realization: the time had come to face not just the doubts within himself, but the very fears of an entire organization. The true test awaited just beyond the curtains of uncertainty. With every heartbeat echoing in anticipation, he mentally prepared himself for the confrontation ahead, where he would finally have to prove his worth not only to Tom and the team, but to himself. As the day of the feedback session approached, a cloud of tension loomed over Brian. He spent each evening reviewing his notes, questioning every idea, every proposed solution. The walls of his small apartment felt like they were closing in, the quiet hum of his son's toys reminding him of the innocence he was fighting for. Could he truly bring about change? Despite the waves of self-doubt, a flicker of determination remained, a stubborn ember that refused to die. By the time the morning of the session arrived, Brian felt the weight of expectations pressing heavily against his chest. He got dressed in a wrinkle-free shirt and wore his best attempt at confidence. As he walked to work, each step felt more like a journey into uncharted territory. He was no longer simply a janitor, he had become a connector, a voice for those who felt unheard. This was the moment he had anticipated, yet the fear of failure clawed at his resolve. The conference room, which had become a battleground for policy discussions, looked different today. He was the one standing at the front, holding the responsibility of setting the tone. The clatter of chairs scraping the floor echoed as employees shuffled in, each face carrying a mix of hope and skepticism. Brian's heart raced as he adjusted the projector screen and smoothed down his shirt, desperately trying not to let the pounding in his chest distract him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the storm within. "Today, I want us to talk openly about the issues we face and how we can address them together." As he spoke, he noticed the uneasy expressions among some employees. This was not just another meeting, it was an invitation to hold their truths in the light. He introduced the idea of establishing an anonymous feedback channel, a step designed to encourage honesty without fear of retribution. The act of drawing this from them was terrifying, but he felt a surge of tenacity fueling his words. The first few comments were, predictably, cautious. Complaints about workload distribution and communication issues trickled in, and Brian listened intently. Each grievance cemented his belief that change was not only necessary but desperately needed. When a long-time employee shared their distress over feeling undervalued, Brian felt the familiar knot at the pit of his stomach tighten. This wasn't merely a corporate issue, it was personal, each voice adding weight to the burden he carried. "Thank you for sharing that," Brian said, forcing himself to make eye contact. "This isn't just about policies, this is about people. We must create an environment that values every single employee." Tension crackled in the air as some employees leaned forward, their eyes widening with the realization that perhaps their voices truly mattered. The momentum shifted, and suddenly, the feedback began to flow more freely. Brian found himself encouraging one comment after another, his initial fear dissipating into something more powerful, a shared mission. Then, mid-discussion, a line manager stood up, a figure known for their staunch adherence to the old ways. "You have to understand, this won't work. Change is too risky. We need structure." A wave of silence washed over the room. Brian inhaled sharply, feeling a surge of defiance. "Structure is necessary, but it shouldn't silence us. We can integrate new ideas into our framework, it doesn't have to mean chaos. We owe it to ourselves to adapt." The room buzzed with uncertainty, but behind that, he sensed something else, the flickers of recognition and appreciation. Was this what it meant to be a facilitator? To illuminate paths others couldn't see? As the discussions continued, Brian felt an electrifying shift. The turnout transformed from a chore into collective hope. With every voice that rose, his initial doubts faded. They were no longer just employees, they were allies in a shared vision for a better workplace. When the session concluded, applause broke out, echoing against the stark walls. Brian's heart swelled as he looked around the room, feeling as if he had ignited a spark of something profound. Yet as he exhaled, a new fear gripped him. Would the leadership team, especially Tom, be willing to embrace these changes? Would they see the value in the voices that had risen today? That haunting worry settled in as he exited the room, leaving the applause ringing in his ears. He realized he was now deeply entangled in something larger than himself, something that demanded relentless courage to sustain. With that realization came a decisive thought: change would not happen without confrontation. The next phase awaited, and this time it would involve not just the employees but the very overseers of the status quo. As he turned the corner, the question lingered: were they ready to hear what he would say next? The days following the feedback session felt like an unyielding roller coaster of anticipation and anxiety. Brian's mornings were punctuated by the echo of applause, yet the weight of uncertainty loomed heavier than ever. He found himself navigating through dual realms, the newfound empowerment he had felt during the meeting and the apprehensive scrutiny of the leadership team that awaited him. The moment he stepped into the office on Monday, Brian spotted Tom, the head of operations, in an animated discussion with several senior managers. The sight sent a tremor of dread through him. Would they dismiss the feedback he fostered? Or worse, would they come after him for instigating such disruption? He steeled himself, recalling the voices of his coworkers. They were counting on him now, not just as their janitor, but as an advocate for their needs. "Brian," Tom called, breaking the conversation as he approached. The congenial smile on his face was reassuring but deceptive. "Come here. We need to talk." Brian's heart raced as he moved toward the small gathering, aware of the eyes that scrutinized him. "What's on your mind?" he asked, forcing calm into his voice despite a tremble in his hands. "About the session last week," Tom began, his tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "You really stirred things up in there. People were talking. But I want to understand where this is coming from." A direct question, loaded with implications. Brian took a breath, grounding himself in the moment. "We need to recognize that the staff has valid concerns. If we ignore them, we stifle potential and creativity. It's more than just about processes, it's about valuing our team." Tom nodded slowly. "I get that, but change isn't easy, and people are resistant. How do you plan to manage that resistance?" The inquiry hung in the air, an opportunity mixed with a challenge. Brian hesitated, grappling with the weight of the moment. He searched for a response that would not only address Tom's doubt but also articulate the urgency of their circumstances. "I believe that if they see a willingness to adapt from leadership, they'll feel more secure to voice their concerns. It starts with us." Tom's expression softened slightly, but Brian instinctively sensed the tension behind his words. "You're stepping into complex waters, Brian. People may not be ready for this level of transparency." Brian clenched his fists beneath the table, determined to stand his ground. "They need it. The company needs it. We can structure our initiatives to introduce change gradually instead of ignoring the issues altogether." In that moment, he felt vulnerability metamorphosing into conviction. What had seemed like an insurmountable uphill battle crystallized into a call to action. He understood now that his role extended beyond gathering opinions. It was about influencing the decision-makers. Tom's gaze intensified, weighing the prospects. "I can't promise anything, but I'll consider your proposal for a pilot program. You might just have a shot at becoming more involved in how we approach team culture. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." Brian felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with apprehension. Asking for change was one thing, being the architect of it was another. Yet, he also recognized the tremor of possibility resting in Tom's willingness. His voice lowered, raw with sincerity. "If we do this, let us do it right. Let us involve the team in shaping what comes next." As Tom departed, Brian wrestled with the tidal wave of emotions pulsing through him. Every connection he had forged during the feedback session now propelled him further into this uncertain territory. But with each step, he also felt the burgeoning sense of purpose and emergence of leadership within himself that he hadn't realized existed. Still, unease brewed beneath the surface. If Tom was willing to entertain the ideas of the staff, what about the executive board? Would they react with the same openness, or would they view Brian and his vision as a threat? Determined to quell the nagging doubts, Brian resolved to prepare meticulously. He would gather further insights from colleagues to solidify his case. Knowledge was power, and he would arm himself with all he could find. As he exited the meeting room, his phone buzzed. A new message from a coworker flashed on the screen. "I heard rumors that the board is meeting this Friday. They might address your feedback." A different kind of fear settled in. The time had come to face the very leaders he had hoped to inspire. Would they support his initiative or suffocate it before it even breathed? As destination approached, he understood the nature of his journey had shifted once again. This time, it was no longer about feedback, it was about a confrontation that would dictate the future of the workplace he cared deeply for. Would he muster the strength to confront them when it mattered most? Doubt loomed, but so did resolve. Brian sat at his desk, the weight of his upcoming confrontation with the board gnawing at him. The triviality of his usual tasks felt magnified now. Every sweep of the broom, every collection of the trash, seemed to blur against the backdrop of what lay ahead. Zoning out of the mundane, he focused inward, navigating through swirling doubts and aspirations. What if his presentation failed? Was he prepared to face the possibility that the board would dismiss his vision outright? He recalled Tom's cautious optimism. If Tom believed in his capabilities, shouldn't he too? Yet, something gnawed at him, a fear that this newfound desire for change was merely a flicker on the surface, ready to extinguish with the slightest gust of doubt. At lunch, Brian wandered outside to a bench tucked away in a quiet corner of the parking lot. It was a sanctuary, a safe harbor from the impending storm brewing inside the conference room. He pulled his notes from his bag, analyzing his arguments meticulously. Each point was a stepping stone toward persuasion, each statistic a protective shield against dismissal. But beyond the facts, he needed to find a way to connect the humanity behind the numbers. Recalling anecdotes from his colleagues flooded his mind. There was Emily, whose creativity had been dismissed in the past, silencing her voice. Then there was Kevin, feeling the isolation of unrecognized effort. Their stories bubbled up as reminders that the changes he desired weren't abstract, they were personal, tangible, raw. These narratives formed a tapestry that he could weave into his presentation, a narrative of empowerment that sought to unite appeals for respect with concrete actions. This sliver of insight shifted something within him. Brian recognized that he had always focused on the tasks at hand, often neglecting the emotional undercurrents that flowed beneath them. His task now was to not only demand change but to inspire it by laying bare the human experience that necessitated such urgency. He stood up, adrenaline resurfacing as he raised his chin. "I can do this," he murmured to himself. But as he walked back to the main office, he questioned whether he truly believed it. Entering the break room, he spotted Jess, a fellow janitor, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Hey, Jess," he called, his voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Do you have a moment?" Her eyebrows arched, surprise gives way to curiosity. "What's up, Brian? Can you remind me about the last time you felt frustrated at work? I want to make my case stronger for Friday." Jess leaned against the counter, considering. "Oh, that's easy. Last month when they changed our shifts without asking. I felt like we were just numbers, replaced whenever convenient. I wanted to scream." Brian furrowed his brow, realizing how that sentiment echoed the frustrations of so many. Exactly. This is what we need to convey to them: our needs and feelings matter. We deserve a voice. There was fire in his words now, an unrefined passion crafted through shared experiences. As Jess nodded, her support igniting a sense of unity that Brian hadn't anticipated. A new idea crystallized: he would feature real stories during his presentation. This choice would not just carry information, it'd resonate with authenticity. That evening, he meticulously drafted his speech, threading in the poignant reflections he had gathered from colleagues. Each story would serve as a testament to the necessity of the changes he championed. Friday loomed on the horizon. Brian's heart raced at the thought of facing the boardroom. He envisioned the polished conference table, the watchful eyes of executives seated around it in their suits and ties, critics poised to dissect his every word. Would they see the person behind the janitorial role or merely a scapegoat for their faults? Determination surged within him. He would enter that room not just as Brian the janitor but as Brian the advocate, the messenger of change. As he shut his notebook, ready for the next steps in his endeavor, another message buzzed on his phone. This time it was a reminder: final rehearsal in the conference room at 3 p.m. His breath caught for a moment. Rehearsals meant scrutiny and preparation. The time had arrived to step beyond the shadows of self-doubt and out into the light where hopes hinged on conviction. Tomorrow would not just reshape the dynamics of the boardroom, it had the potential to alter Brian's very identity. Would he emerge heralded as a pioneer of change, or would he retreat back into silence once more? The moment was marked. The stakes had never been higher. The morning arrived with an electrifying tension that buzzed in the air. Brian's usual routine felt suffocating, each step through the hall echoing with an urgency that made it difficult to breathe. He felt acutely aware of the sweeping motions of his broom, the dull scraping of trash bags, the impressions his every action would soon leave in the minds of the board members. As 3 p.m. approached, he found himself in front of the mirror in the restroom, adjusting his uniform and contemplating the reflection staring back at him. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, battling against a growing determination. Self-doubt lingered like a shadow, but through it, he glimpsed another version of himself, one who embodied resilience and clarity. He straightened his shoulders, reminding himself why he stood here, not just to present a case, but to give voice to those who felt invisible. Stepping into the conference room, the first wave of anxiety collided with his resolve. The striking contrast of the polished table against the starkness of his uniform struck him, a physical symbol of the divide he sought to bridge. The board members sidled into place, their expressions inscrutable, as if cloaked in professional armor. Brian felt small, yet the narratives he had woven in the fabric of his speech pulsed with life. "Let us begin," the chairperson said, sparking a ripple of nods around the table. Brian took a deep breath, and as he approached the podium, his heart raced. He didn't just see dry statistics, he envisioned Emily's face, Kevin's struggles, Jess's frustration. He opened with their stories, crafting a narrative infused with real emotions and experiences that transcended the mundane details often lost in corporate discussions. "Every day, we clean these halls," he began, his voice steady, "but the dirt we uncover goes beyond floors and windows. We unearth experiences, stories of being overlooked, of not being heard. Just like you, we have aspirations, and we deserve respect." As he delved deeper, he saw flickers of recognition flash across some faces. It ignited a spark, a flicker of a connection. Words flowed from him, each sentence threading these stories together into a larger vision of unity and progress. He painted a picture of a workplace that entrusted its janitorial staff with dignity, collaborative practices, a place where voices were not merely acknowledged but celebrated. But as he neared the heart of his speech, he felt the glimmer of confidence tremble. What if it all fell apart? Could these narratives truly instigate change? He pushed past the doubt. Confronting it, he reinforced his purpose. "We don't want to be an afterthought. Our voices matter, our lives matter. Enable us to be contributors, not just cleaners." The room shifted, eyes darting between him and the board members. A high-ranking member adjusted in his seat, brow furrowing, the air thick with contemplation. Brian sensed the gravity of their contemplations. Here was a pivotal moment, yet, as he prepared for a compelling conclusion, an unexpected interruption shook him. "Brian, you really think our employees are ready for this?" The voice cut through like ice, a challenge to his growth. It was an old high school acquaintance, now the HR director in a corner office, blocking a path he intended to forge. He hesitated, but the power of his message surged through him. "They are ready." Brian responded, each word sharpened with clarity. "What you perceive as inconvenience, they experience as frustration. We deserve the chance to rise. We deserve the change." Silence enveloped the room, the weight of his proclamation hanging impossibly heavy. In that moment, a realization struck him. He wasn't just presenting ideas, he was confronting a wall of indifference. Could he truly effect the change they needed? As murmurs began to ripple, he sensed an awakening, a crack in the armor surrounding the established order. Tomorrow might not merely reset board agendas, perhaps, it could recalibrate his standing in their eyes. "Let us take time to consider this," the chairperson finally said. Cutting through the swirling tension. Brian's heart raced. A nod from the board was a door creaking open, but as he stepped away from the podium, he couldn't shake the haunting question: was the board genuinely considering change, or was this merely another fleeting moment in their curriculum of corporate compliance? Tomorrow loomed larger than before. The stakes were higher, his purpose increasingly clear. Brian had laid the groundwork, but true transformation demanded further steps. Could he summon the courage to follow through? Would he risk the confrontation that would either solidify his new identity or send him retreating to silence once more? Brian arrived at work the next day, his heart still fluttering from the previous afternoon's emotional surge. The silence as he entered the building felt almost foreign, trapped in a moment before the chaos, an echo of his newfound ambition reverberating within him. Despite the hum of machinery and footsteps echoing down the hallways, his mind was overwhelmingly focused. How could he capitalize on the faint glimmer of hope he sensed at yesterday's meeting? In the break room, the typically mundane chatter felt charged with anticipation. His co-workers, initially unaware of the seismic shift he was attempting to incite, seemed to sense something brewing. Brian caught snippets of conversations, people discussing the board's reaction, the changes that might come. He noticed a flicker of curiosity in their eyes, a spark of potential engagement that hadn't existed before. The ripple effects of his words were beginning to saturate the air. "Hey, Brian. That was bold yesterday. How are you feeling?" Jess's question seemed to hang there, floating in the mix of uncertainty and excitement. "Like I've taken a step into deep water," he replied, exposing the vulnerability beneath his confident facade. "I can't turn back now. I need to keep pushing, but what if the board just labels it all as noise?" "But maybe it's more than noise," Jess countered, her eyes glimmering with a mix of encouragement and fear. "Maybe they need to hear someone like you." The gravity of those words settled deep within him. He had dared to fill the silence. Could there be more voices joining him? The potential for collaboration filled his mind. He decided to reach out to others, to create a chorus echoing the sentiments he had voiced. He spent the next few hours drafting a message to his colleagues. It was straightforward but aimed to embolden. "Let us meet at lunch. I want to hear your experiences, your needs. The time for silence is over." The response was electrifying. Colleagues expressed interest, and discussions began to bubble like a pot nearing its boiling point. The unity he sought started to form not as a mere collection of individuals, but a surge of shared determination. The prospect of coming together infused him with a renewed sense of purpose, propelling his professional growth forward. Returning to the conference room later that week was daunting, the polished surfaces reflecting his resolve stronger than before. The board had called a follow-up meeting, and the very fact that he was being invited back solidified the resolve within him. But now, there was more at stake. It was no longer just his voice being weighed against theirs, it was a chorus of voices he hoped to present a united front demanding respect and acknowledgement. Anxiety punctured the air as Brian entered the room again, but this time, the fear morphed into something else: anticipation. He looked over at Jess, who gave him an encouraging nod from the back. That small gesture anchored him, reminding Brian that even if he stumbled, he was no longer alone. He needed to ensure their stories were represented, their frustrations articulated. As the chairperson called for order, Brian decided this was his moment to relay what he had gathered. "Thank you for allowing me to come back," he began, heart racing, the audacity of his plans traversing his mind. "Yesterday's dialogue sparked something within not just me, but our entire team. We are here collectively to share our aspirations. Our voices deserve to be heard." He could feel the board members shifting in their seats, their expressions unreadable, perhaps processing the shift from an individual to a collective. "Ask them what they want," the voice in his head prodded, tentative yet certain. Brian took a bold step forward. "I'd like to invite our team openly to share their experiences. It's time the board hears from the faces behind the uniforms." No one interrupted. Their silence now echoed a different narrative, a mix of tension and possibility, an air buzzing with forgotten voices inching toward resurgence. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it also fortified his purpose. Every heartbeat echoed with the realization that this moment was not just about them, it was about reshaping the very definition of respect and recognition within a system that had long ignored them. Tomorrow, he thought to himself as he braced for the outcome, would reveal whether the time for their moment had truly arrived or if it would pass like so many opportunities before. Would this be his triumph, or might it crumble under the weight of indifference? The day Brian had anticipated finally arrived. He stood in front of the polished conference table, a wave of nervous energy coursing through his veins as he prepared to unveil the culmination of his journey. The room brimmed with tension, as board members and executives settled into their seats. He remembered the fear that had once shackled him, yet now he felt a steadiness, a confidence born from the struggles he had embraced. "Thank you for having us back," Brian began, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. "I appreciate the opportunity to continue the dialogue we started last week. Today, we're not just talking about change, we're here to define it together." The chairperson gestured for silence before Brian continued. our conversation inspired a movement within our team. I went back to my colleagues, the people who, like me, hold this company together from the shadows. They want to be heard, and today, they're ready to share why. He stepped aside, allowing Jess and a few others to stand and voice their thoughts. Each shared anecdote, each heartfelt story of frustration and aspiration echoed through the room, their voices fortified by Brian's earlier courage. Their words painted a vivid picture of a workplace that needed transformation, and with every testimony, Brian felt the initial flicker of doubt recede. Colleagues openly expressed their dreams, frustrations, and the respect they yearned for but often found elusive. The atmosphere shifted. What began as a formal meeting transformed into a dynamic exchange, a dialogue rather than a monologue. As each voice resonated, Brian observed board members shifting in their seats, their hardened facades softening. It was clear they were listening. Tom interjected periodically, asking probing questions, revealing a genuine interest in understanding the transformation the team sought. In that moment, Brian recognized a shift not just within himself but within the corporate culture he once viewed as intimidating. When Jess finished her thoughts, Brian leaned back in, feeling the exhilaration of empowerment. We're not asking for pity nor merely lofty promises. We want substantive changes that reflect the value of our contributions. It's time our experiences shape policies that genuinely respect the multitude of voices in this room, he said, feeling each word strengthen his resolve. There was silence as he finished speaking, an anticipation hanging in the air. Tom was the first to break the quiet. We appreciate your candidness today. It's clear our organization has some work to do. And I have to admit I underestimated the power of your collective voice. A palpable energy coursed through the room, a collective acknowledgement of the transformation unfolding. Tom leaned forward, eyes sparkling with possibility. I would like to propose that we form a committee comprised of both the leadership and employees that will evaluate our current culture and employee practices. This committee will ensure their voices are woven into our strategies moving forward. Brian's heart soared, a profound sense of fulfillment blooming within him. They were not merely words at that moment but tangible steps towards a brighter future, a future where his colleagues' concerns would matter, where change was not just a whisper but a roar. As the meeting concluded, Brian felt a profound shift. His voice had catalyzed a movement, and the respect he fought for was finally emerging. He wasn't just a janitor, he had become a leader, a beacon of change. Walking out of the conference room side by side with Jess, they shared a knowing smile. The whispers of worries that had once haunted him were replaced by the powerful affirmation of achievement. He had not only advocated for himself but had cultivated a legacy of change that would benefit countless others. As the sun set over the Chicago skyline, Brian returned home to Ethan, eyes gleaming with triumph. "Dad, you did it, didn't you?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," Brian replied softly, the weight of fatherhood and newfound confidence lacing his words. "I guess I finally found my voice. And it's only the beginning." Each obstacle had ultimately lit a fire within him that could no longer be extinguished. No longer bound by fear or self-doubt, Brian stood tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that change begins with the courage to speak up. His journey from janitor to a cherished voice within a corporation was not just an accomplishment, it was a testament to resilience, a reminder that every story matters, no matter how small. Now is the moment to reflect on your own journey. Are you ready to take the first step towards your own transformation? Subscribe immediately to our channel so you won't miss any future stories of personal breakthroughs. Leave a like now to boost our community and keep these stories alive. Comment below with your thoughts and tell us how you relate to Brian's journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need inspiration to embark on their path of change. You need to show your support. Every action matters. Don't wait even one more second to take part in our transformative narratives.